Good evening. Happy Thursday. A day without snow is like a day without sunshine. I don't think that's really a saying. But we have not had any snow today, and any day without snow in this fucking catastrophically horrendous winter is a good day indeed. So today is a movie anniversary, and this is one of those films that is a Generation X standard. It is a film that feels like it's made for Generation X, but in fact, you could argue that it was made for the boomers. Okay, boomer. But on this day, 1993, a very difficult film, a challenging film, a movie that many people consider to be, if not a masterpiece, but very, very close to, and one of the best films by its quite extraordinary star. On this day, 1993, saw the release of Joel Schumacher's, mismarketed as if it was a one man standing up for what was right, but it's actually not at all. But Joel Schumacher's expose of the boomer generation realizing that they've been sold a bill of goods by the government. I love that. Falling Down. Now, Falling Down is a film that it seems as if it's people look upon it as if it was a more widespread success critically and commercially than it actually was. And this is a movie, and I've talked about this concept. There are some films that are not that well remembered by history, which means that they may have gotten a lot of acclaim, may have gotten awards consideration, maybe even won some big awards, but 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years down the road, you look at it and say, well, that wasn't even like one of the 10 best movies of its year, or that really wasn't such a great performance by, Pacino, or whatever the case might be. So Falling Down is a movie that got decent reviews. It's at 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. But the surprise for people who were maybe picking it up more recently and, getting into it, it was not really a hit at the box office. They were able to keep the budget to a respectable level. And Michael Douglas, the star of the movie, did not get his normal, what he was making in that era. It was not that many years prior that he had won Best Actor for his first turn as Gordon Greed is Good Gecko. I talk about a movie to a certain generation, Wall Street. But Falling Down only grossed $40.5 million in the United States and Canada. Now that's okay. The film's not a box office bomb. But for a movie that is very well remembered by history, where more people picking it up within the last 2 decades consider it one of the best films Michael Douglas was ever in, it's not. Maybe the best film Joel Schumacher ever made, it's not. And a high watermark in the career of a legend who just passed a few weeks ago, Robert Duvall, it's not. I have never gotten the hype. There were people when this movie came out going crazy. This is incredible. It looks like a movie about a guy standing up for what's right, standing up against the system and the government, and he's mad as hell and he's not going to take it anymore. That's not really what this movie is about. And it bothers me in a similar vein to Taxi Driver, that a lot of people just didn't get this movie and they're seeing it as something other than what it is. And if you want to say that I'm part of the problem here, because going to film school, I was seeing movies from about 6 or 7 different angles. I'm at level 9, and the average person just wants a story told at level 1. So Falling Down, a challenging film, a difficult film, a film that's fun to talk about, but a movie that does not succeed. It doesn't do what you think it does. It is not about a guy who got screwed by the system and wants to know where the American dream went, any more than Taxi Driver is about a lonely cabbie who fights back against evil. That's not Taxi Driver. And Falling Down is not about one lonely, sad boomer fighting back against a corrupt power structure that has made him seem, or made him think, that he's just an ordinary working stiff who's not really doing that great in life. Now, Michael Douglas's performance is beyond reproach. If I'm asked the question, name your 5 favorite Michael Douglas's performances, or even the 5 best Michael Douglas performances, I might have this on the list. I'm not sure. I might. But this film was mismarketed as like a suspense thriller. It's not really a suspense thriller. I mean, give me a break. But it was not. It's like the studio marketed a film that they wanted to have made, and Schumacher maybe didn't give them exactly what they were looking for. So I mentioned Taxi Driver, and the character that Michael Douglas plays, Bill Foster, great name. We don't actually get that name right away. We know him as Defense because it's on his license plate. And I guess he must be a defense contractor. We can make a lot of jokes about that too, because defense contractors and the government, right? They're in bed together, all governments. So Falling Down is about an ordinary guy who probably at a certain point in time had a good job, who, while he's on the LA freeway, he just basically seems to snap. He seems to snap and goes on a bit of a rampage. That's true. That's what happens. But this movie is about mental illness. This movie is about a mentally ill man who does not realize he seems to have had a psychotic break, and he is incapable of perceiving himself as the bad guy. From a certain point of view, this is a tragedy. This is a tragic story. And it was just not judged correctly, I don't think. And this movie is not successful. The first hour, brilliant. The scenes with Michael Douglas starting to lose his shit in traffic, and he's hearing voices, and he has the ex-wife, played a wonderful actress, an Oscar nominee, not for this movie, Barbara Hershey. Love her in The Natural with Redford. Roy, will you be the best there ever was in the game? Pew, 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 pew. Barbara Hershey plays the ex-wife. And Robert Duvall plays detective. His name is Prendergast in the world of the film. And he's trying to figure out what this Bill Foster guy is up to, because none of this makes any sense. This guy does not fit the mold. This guy doesn't seem like he would be doing what he's doing and what's happening. But when I said how I thought the first hour of the movie is great, it's great because Defense takes antisocial actions. He takes law-breaking actions, but he does them in such a way where you kind of feel like you get why he's losing it, or why he has had this, which it seems like a random break from reality. We learn later in the film, ain't nothing random about it, that the guy was more of a ticking time bomb than we're led to believe. But the scene in the McDonald's, I don't want lunch, I want breakfast, awesome. And the scene with Michael Douglas's Defense in a surplus store, run by one of the most interesting actors to work in the last, 100 years, Frederick Forrest. What a great name. That's a great name for a character, but that's the name of the actor. And Frederick Forrest could always be counted on, he unfortunately passed a couple of years ago, to give very realistic, authentic, intense performances. And ironically, a performance of his which is not really what you would call intense. He has I don't know if I would call it a small role, but he plays a very important character in Francis Coppola's The Conversation. And Frederick Forrest in Falling Down plays, basically he's a Nazi, is this guy. He's a white supremacist guy. And he runs a surplus store. And Michael Douglas's character is so batshit crazy that he's too crazy for Frederick Forrest's character, which is kind of funny because what I just told you about Frederick Forrest's character, each guy thinks the other is beyond repair. There's some humor to be mined from that. The idea, not the enemy of the enemy is my friend, but the idea of you could have a Hannibal Lecter character, you could have a Buffalo Bill character, but you could still find some other guy that's going to scare the shit out of them both. Now, in that particular instance, I believe that if you put Buffalo Bill and Hannibal Lecter in a room, they could schmooze. They could have bagels and coffee. They could talk about maiming and murdering and I don't even know what else, eating someone's liver with fava beans and a nice Chianti, cutting someone's skin off and saving it. We could talk about all that kind of stuff. But I believe if you introduce Frank Booth from Blue Velvet into that, those two guys, Buffalo Bill and Hannibal Lecter, will do anything to get away from Frank Booth because he's crazier than both of them put together. So you have this incredible scene where Frederick Forrest starts freaking out because Defense is a fucking lunatic, and Defense is becoming more and more disgusted by the surplus store guy. So these scenes work. But at a certain point in the movie, there's a scene where Bill Foster defends, I think he's in someone's backyard, and I felt that the movie just went dead at that point and did not recover. It just didn't work for me, and this is one of those films that I would say you could call it a great near miss. So I'm not telling you this film is terrible. I'd give this film 2.5 to 3 stars. I would give it thumbs up. I would tell anybody, don't listen to me, go see this movie. You know, I could have put this in the category of most overhyped films, but this film, there were a lot of critics that had the same reaction as me. The 75% is higher than it was at the time. Many of the major New York City critics, Newsday, I remember, gave it 2 stars, and I don't know, I feel like Roger Ebert gave it a favorable review, but I'm drawing a blank, and I don't remember about Gene Siskel. I didn't happen to watch their program. You know, 1993, still the pre-internet era. But Douglas's performance never strikes a false note. And it's easy for, I know I say this kind of thing a lot, but it bears repeating. It's easy for the younger generation who only knows Michael Douglas in his much older era to lose sight. They don't even know in the first place that this guy was just about the biggest star in Hollywood for a number of years. That this was the guy. He was somebody who, like a Clint Eastwood, was producing material. Sometimes he starred in, sometimes he just produced, such as Face Off, where he was the point man. And you know, I want to reboot The Matrix, and I want to get the version of Face Off, the original concept. It was going to be Michael Douglas and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, we got a great movie. We got a top 5 all-time action movie with Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. But there's a version, out there in a multiverse where it's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Michael Douglas, and man, it would have been gold. It would have for sure been probably even more of a guilty pleasure movie. You know, Arnold, look at the size of my arms. I mean, it would have been great. You know, Arnold pretended to be Michael Douglas. Great stuff. But Michael Douglas, in a very short period of time, starting in 1987, was either in almost every film he was in is either a great movie, he gives a great performance, or both. In 1987, he had Fatal Attraction. I don't think that his performance is necessarily that great, but Glenn Close knocks it out of the park, and he's at least good in that film. But Fatal Attraction was a movie. It was the first of the, I guess, Michael Douglas sex trilogy, or because he was in a lot of movies that were getting into hot button issues, you know, sex and the single guy. How bad is it in the AIDS era if you hook up with a girl that, you know, all of this stuff. So Fatal Attraction dealt with that, and it was an enormous box office hit, but it was a hot button issue movie. People were talking about it and arguing about it in 1987 and then, you know, into the following year. But there was an enormous box office hit, and then his Oscar-winning turn as Gecko, he wins Best Actor, even though it's kind of a supporting part, right? I mean, Gecko's not the lead. Bud Fox, the Charlie Sheen character, nominally is the lead. Well, Michael Douglas, the man who won an Oscar for producing, as I mentioned, Clint, for producing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which originally was going to star his dear old dad, Kirk, and Kirk kind of was aged out of the role, and here comes Jack winning all the hardware the year after he should have won for Chinatown, and he somehow lost to Art Carney for Harry and Tonto. How did that happen? How did Jack Nicholson or Gene Hackman for The Conversation, how did they not win? What happens? How do these things take place? The Oscars are political. Bro, they've been saying that since the 1940s. Whatever that means, they've been saying it. The Department of They in Hollywood, they've been saying it since then. But Michael Douglas, 1987, Fatal Attraction, Wall Street. 1989, he has Black Rain with Andy Garcia and Kate Capshaw, directed by Ridley Scott. That's a really good movie and a fantastic performance by Michael Douglas. Then he has The War of the Roses with his old buddy, Kathleen Turner, you know, from Romancing the Stone and Jewel of the Nile. That's a movie, they did the remake, I think, with Benedict Cumberbatch, where you have a warring couple, you know, a black comedy. Danny DeVito is very funny in The War of the Roses. And then Michael Douglas took a little bit of time off, and he had Shining Through early in 1992. It's okay. I mean, it's a little cheeseball. It was up for a bunch of Razzies. It's all right. Melanie Griffith is in it. David Seltzer. Was based on, was it Susan Isaacs? I think Susan Isaacs was the name of the author. It was a very strange World War II spy story. Douglas's performance is fine, But no offense, I don't think that he and Melanie Griffith looked that good up there on screen together. I feel like that was a mistake, but whatever. And then a couple of months after that, you had Basic Instinct, the second of the Michael Douglas Let's Talk About Sex trilogy. So Basic Instinct was one of the biggest box office hits of the first part of the decade. And for an R-rated movie, there was no IP. That just wasn't, it didn't happen. So Falling Down was Michael Douglas's next movie after Basic Instinct. And, you know, I don't like to talk politics, you know, not that I'm not interested, but this is not a politics podcast. But there are certain things, you know, have to be brought up when discussing movies and putting them into a historical context. So Falling Down is set in and around LA. The character of the Prendergast, the Robert Duvall character, and Tuesday Weld plays his wife in the film, Amanda. They're in and around Los Angeles, Hollywood Hills, wherever the exact, you know, wherever they are exactly. You have to. Falling Down was shot during the LA riots. There were scenes in the film that were shot as the riots were going on, and Michael Douglas talked about this a couple of times. He hasn't mentioned it recently, but in the era, he talked about it. And there's just an unbelievable scene, which to me, it strained credulity, like you just throw it out the window, where he has a rocket launcher. And that scene was shot as the riots were going on elsewhere, not that far from where they were shooting it, probably 10 miles, maybe it was a little bit more. So with the historical context, this movie coming out when it did, there were some people where it hit deeper because of what I just said, because of the disaster that took place there. And Michael Douglas's character is so reckless that people who see him as some kind of an unsung hero, I'd rather have a guy like, I hate to say, Travis Bickle's a better guy because Travis Bickle intended to commit mass murder, but they're two peas of a pod. They are both mentally challenged, mentally damaged, and people who have basically, they need to be locked up. They need to be put in a mental institution. They shouldn't be out and about. They shouldn't be trying to stand up for the little guy or stand up, or as Michael Douglas says, I'm just standing up for my rights as a consumer. Yeah, you threaten to shoot people with an Uzi because they want to serve you a hamburger instead of a McGriddle. In immortal words of Tom Cruise again, go fuck yourself. Why don't you turn around and do something else? What are you doing in here with a machine? Okay, whatever. But I don't know when the kind of consensus turned that more and more people kind of latched onto this film, because I know many people that would in fact have this in the top tier of Michael Douglas, you know, movies. And after Falling Down, he did another film like the capper in the sex trilogy Disclosure, based on the Michael Crichton novel, which is about, I mean, it's about a lot of things, but it has a main piece of that is about sexual harassment in the workplace. And of course, the twist in that movie is a little bit absurd, that Demi Moore just can't go on with her professional life without having sex with Michael Douglas. I mean, give me a break. I love Michael Douglas, but I don't buy the idea that he's that irresistible, that she's going to basically threaten his career and throw her own career away just so maybe she could have a roll in the hay with Michael Douglas. So Falling Down right now, I don't know if it's free on any streaming service. It's not on any of the main streamers, like it's not on Netflix or Prime. I mean, you can rent it on Prime. You can rent it on Apple Plus, you know, for $3. But I don't think that it's free. It's certainly not free on any of the main, you know, services like HBO Max. But it might be on Tubi. It might be on like Hoopla or Canopy or one of those. You just have to kind of putter around. As I say, this is a movie that I recommend people see. Remember, I've talked about films such as Interview with the Vampire, which I think is not very good, way overhyped. The Usual Suspects, which I think in a similar way to Falling Down, the movie doesn't stick the landing. I'm in the way minority on that one, but I feel like the last act of The Usual Suspects, for me, seeing it in theaters was just an enormous letdown. I thought the film was great, and the last 20 minutes, you know, just were terrible, just horrendous. And then I found out I was like the only person who felt that way. Great stuff, right? But Falling Down is a movie that I do think if you're a cineast, you do have to see it because there are so many challenging elements. And you ask yourself, this movie is supposed to be aimed at boomers. But if you get too caught up in the idea of one man, striking back against the system or the government, or the idea of, we were promised that if we worked hard, we were going to be able to retire at a certain age, et cetera, right? We're still talking about this more than 3 decades later. But this ultimately is a film about a man who desperately needs help, doesn't get it, and is now mingling among people who don't necessarily need to be put in a psychiatric hold. Otherwise, everyone around them might end up dead, and he'll be like, well, what did I do that was so terrible, right? So, 33 years, man. February 26th, 1993, the release date of Joel Schumacher's Falling Down. Now, this is one of those movies, if you're on kind of a round table, you could talk about this for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and not repeat yourself, because it is a film that gives you an enormous amount to chew on. I just feel like too many people had the wrong idea, and the movie just didn't work. It just didn't work for me, and I've never had the urge to revisit it. It just made me very frustrated, upset, and aggravated that it just didn't work, and Duvall comes to play. He's terrific, and Tuesday Weld as his wife, she hadn't really been very active at that point. I thought she gave a really good performance, and Barbara Hershey just looks, has that old school movie star look on screen. And every moment with her it elevates the material. And as I said, can't fault Michael Douglas. I mean, he really, really disappears into the character, because he was playing all of those leading man roles and leading man kind of adjacent, if you will, type of roles with Basic Instinct, where, I mean, he certainly has a lot of sex in that movie. Jeanne Tripplehorn hooks up with her, destroys her dress, and he gets to deliver a top-tier great line from the first part of the 90s when Jeanne Tripplehorn in Basic Instinct asks his character, Nick Curran, how's your sex life, Nick? And Michael Douglas, as only he can, I've got calluses. Man, that was a great line. I've got calluses. I remember watching that in the theaters. The audience was going nuts. Because not everybody, what does he mean by that? Nothing. It's probably a blown take that they just left in the movie. Anyway, so I just wanted to talk about Falling Down, a film that you would think was a bigger box office hit than it was. You would think that it was an awards contender. It wasn't. And that was a critical darling. It really wasn't. There were some critics. I think Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times gave it a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. There were some critics that put it, among their favorite films of that quite extraordinary year. But from 1993, I could literally name, and I won't subject you to this, but I could name 50 movies that are better than Falling Down, major studio films. That's, to me, the single best year Hollywood ever had. But that's beside the point. Falling Down, 33 years old today, directed by Joel Schumacher, a story of urban alienation. Here's another great, kind of catchphrase, urban alienation, starring Michael Douglas, Barbara Hershey, Tuesday Weld, Robert Duvall, and in a very creepy role, the late, great Frederick Forrest. I'll skip the wrap up so you can just, fast forward to the end of this or whatever. You don't really need it. You already know how to subscribe if you haven't. You already know how to, smash the alert bell and all of that kind of stuff. So on this Thursday where we got 0 snow here in New York, I hope you have a great rest of your night. Peace.